Welcome to the Fermynwoods Contemporary Art Podcast, guest curated and presented by Subterra. I am your host and one half of Subterra, Marie-Chantal Hamrock. We invite you to get lost in the unknown as we take a stroll through rich woodlands, dark forests, and subterrestrial landscapes. As we navigate these eerie and unfamiliar spaces, we will explore artist talks, discussions, and original commissioned sound art. With each new episode in this season, I am amazed at the response to the theme of xylophobia. Every piece produced in response to this theme has branched off in unique and innovative ways. And this rich and profound work by A Ton of Worms roots itself firmly in our forest of xylophobia episodes. A Ton of Worms is a multidisciplinary artist and writer whose primary focus is an immersive communing with Taxus Baccata, the English you, through both classic art forms as well as field recordings, whittling, fermentation, and propagation. Their work also addresses the conservation of persecuted wildlife and plants, the maligned and misrepresented and often chthonic species overlooked by many, and the beauty and effulgence of decay at the intersection of nature and civilization. Wood as Home, Dirt as Time is the audio recording of a performance piece undertaken on the Summer Solstice of 2023 and edited retrospectively into a sound collage. It explores themes of time, space, nature, and human connection through the chthonic lens of an ancient yew tree. As part of the transcript for this episode, we have also attached a piece of writing composed by A Ton of Worms to contextualize the work. And as many of you may know, Subterra, comprised of myself and Astrid, emerged out of a deep interest in the chthonic, so it was a pleasure to speak to A Ton of Worms regarding themes related to the underworld, as well as the motivations behind making this piece. So, without further ado, here is Wood as Home, Dirt as Time, followed by a discussion with the artist.
Maybe this place has always been seen by local people as special, as somehow spiritual, mystical. And that's partly because yew trees have always had that kind of reputation. They're evergreen, so they don't lose their leaves in the autumn like most of the trees around here. And a tree like this has been here for so long and it's been cared for by local people all that time, but actually caring for them doesn't take a lot of care. It just needs to be left well alone, really, and it will just live on and on and on.
It's just the living. Sometimes I like to go for walks in graveyards, in a churchyard. One has a sense of communion with the dead.
You described yourself as a multidisciplinary artist and writer, and I think that's a really just thing, because it's such an embodied thing. There's the performance, there's the sound, there's the writing, which I'm really keen to talk about the writing actually. And there's the illustration, which I'm also really keen to speak about. And the image. So yeah, it's like you've created a whole little world or microcosm around this yew tree. And yeah, so thank you very much for contributing. I mean, I think every time we commission a new artist to do an episode, I think there's no possible new way someone could respond to the theme of xylophobia, because you might think it's quite like a narrow theme at first, but then you realize like everyone's got such a different perspective. And you not only like saw the tree and made work about it, it's like you went into it and then you went underground as well. So it was like the most embodied tree experience, I think, that, you know. So yeah, I was just wondering if you could talk about the significance of the place and of the yew tree, both in your practice in general, but also of this specific yew. Because I know that you've talked about, or that you're interested in the yew itself.
Yeah, so I don't really know how it came about particularly. There was like a mild interest which kind of developed into a fascination, which has become kind of like spiritual in a way. And it really like you probably already know, it feeds into pretty much everything I do. And also the kind of connection between this tree and the underworld and the kind of darker side of nature, I suppose. But yeah, so that obviously yew trees are very, very long-lived organisms and also very toxic. So they've had, and also very socially used, like the first weapons that have ever been discovered, like Neanderthal spears, were made of yew tree. And obviously there was the English longbow was made of yew, which almost like depleted yew trees in Europe altogether. Like England didn't have a large enough stock, so we imported them from everywhere. And now there's like barely any ancient yew trees left on the continent. But this particular one is outside a very old church. I'm not sure how old, I think maybe Saxon, but what you find is like with these churches that it's Saxon on top of something else, on top of something else, and it's just like a place of worship that gets built upon as the centuries go past. But this tree is suspected to be about 1800 years old. It's extremely, like you've seen the picture, like it's very girthy. I think it's probably like 8 meters or so in circumference, maybe a little bit bigger. And the inside of it is like a small room, basically. Like you could fit people in there. And supposedly there was a medieval family that stayed in it at one point. But that's, you know, they can't verify that. So when I was thinking about xylophobia and stuff, I was thinking, there's this kind of darker, this fear, which a lot of it kind of draws upon, like witches and poison and war and all of these kind of contextual things come in. But then also this tree was, I guess, a shelter at one point, and it's cared for and has been cared for by the people who go to church and the people who look after the churchyard. So that was basically I mean, there's a lot more context around the piece. Like, is when I was thinking it through, there was so much that came in. But that's the reason why I chose that particular tree, because it has that association with a family in it, as well as, just the general kind of vibes of the particular tree species, I guess.
Yeah. And I guess, yeah, like you were saying, the fact that a family could have supposedly lived in there gives you an idea of the sense of scale of how big it really is.
Yeah, it really is like a small room. Like, I mean, I didn't physically, didn't get my whole body in the tree, but I could have if I wanted to. Like, I sort of leant in when I was doing what I was doing, because, these old trees have there's a lot of footfall over the centuries around these trees, and it compacts the roots, and that can cause problems. So
right.
I didn't want to be too invasive, but I was recording in the tree, as a sort of dome.
And then I really wanted to talk to you as well about the word chthonic and the theme of making work that is chthonic or related to the chthonic, because obviously that's something that myself and Astrid are really interested in, and it's kind of how we started collaborating as well. And yeah, it was just maybe the particular significance that it has to your work, and why you're interested in it. I think that would be interesting to talk about.
I would love to be able to sort of pin that down.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But I'm not really sure that I can. I think I've just always been drawn to the kind of darker aspect of nature and the beneath the ground. And also, I guess in my own spiritual kind of practice, it's kind of, channeled in that direction. A lot of what I was thinking in terms of the chthonic with this was how the earth is sort of a vessel of time, like the physical earth, like the soil, especially if you've had sort of centuries of human activity. As the soil comes up, the history goes down, and eventually that it continues going down, right? It becomes the underworld. So I was thinking, with the vibrations of the instrument, I guess I can call it an instrument, if you could see it, and I wish I took a picture of it because it was an absolute mess, but I was thinking of penetrating history, basically. If you could hold a megaphone to the earth and scream into it, that was essentially what I was thinking of, but using a twanging sort of guitar string on a stick.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about how I started being interested in it as well, the chthonic, and I couldn't really pinpoint it either. I mean, I guess it's just a sort of natural interest that some people have in the dark.
Yeah, I think probably people did have it more, back when we were more sort of intimately connected to the earth and what was beneath it, as well as, what comes out.
And also, you spoke about how, I'm not sure if it is with a ton of worms thing, but representing things that might be maligned or something. And I think that the chthonic allows for that kind of othering.
Yeah, right. And it's, a lot of the sort of species that are considered of the earth are persecuted, like badger cull, foxes are hunted, all of those kind of things. So
yeah,
I mean, I think a part of me in my sort of ordinary political day-to-day life involved in those bits, sort of it spills into one another.
Of course. Yeah, I just thought it was I just think it's a very powerful image in multiple ways. So that was, something I definitely thought about a lot while listening to the work, even if you didn't intend it for it to be that way.
Well, that's great.
Then the other thing I was going to say, was just to ask about the actual performance itself, and how that felt, that what was it that you called it? That action, Was there anyone around? Was it completely private? How did you feel?
So as you can probably tell from the recording, it's not that far away from roads. And in reality,
that was so interesting, actually, because it could have been any moment in history if it hadn't been for those cars, I think, which was good because it was like, okay, this is really happening now, you know.
I think they really add something to it as well. I wanted it to be of an instant, you know, like of that particular moment in time, in space, like right there. So I think the cars kind of add to it, and especially the sort of tone that it's never too like intrusive, and it's always sort of like it's roaring, but it's like kind of a nice bassy sort of roar. But anyway, yeah, it wasn't that far away from that road, and that road is also not that far away from a motorway as well. But I don't think you can really hear the motorway in the background. But it's just a churchyard in the middle of the countryside, really, that just happens to have like a road that comes off the motorway going past it. So it was kind of secluded. And it's actually really, if you were to look at it, it's actually really nicely sort of enclosed by trees around the boundary of the churchyard. So no one can really see what I was doing, which I was kind of grateful for. And but I didn't feel strange doing it, really. I mean, I'm around these trees a lot, so it kind of feels like being at home anyway. But I hadn't had no plan for what I would do if someone did come upon me, because I know people do like frequent there, because I've found like condom wrappers and like stuff tied to trees, and people leave crystals and all sorts of stuff. So like people do go there. And I think that ties into the chthonic thing as well. Like it is a space of sort of like secrecy and hiddenness, like especially the tree itself. Yew trees normally like grow back down towards the earth and reroot their branches. So you do sort of get like this arching canopy that reaches down to the ground, which, you know, they have very dark foliage. So it is sort of like a veil between this world and the outside. But yeah, I had no contingency plan for that, really. So I'm glad it didn't happen, because I'm not sure what I would have done. And I really didn't want to have to interrupt that moment in time, because I did want it to be sort of like unedited. I mean, it's edited, but unedited continuity of the piece. But it was interesting.
I can imagine. I mean, I'm sure it was trance-like almost, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it was really beautiful, actually, the timing of some of the birds coming in and out, and like their singing. Like especially in that section in the center when there's a blackbird singing, and it sounds like so otherworldly when you slow it down, like kind of like a dinosaur.
Yeah.
And then right at the end, as I was leaving the space, a wood pigeon flew off. So it was kind of like these natural sort of like moments that just kind of encapsulated the whole kind of thing. It was really beautiful, actually, to sort of mess around with it after the fact, and then hear how these sort of other beings kind of come in and out of the piece and like add to it.
Yeah.
Like the blackbird is the star of the piece, really. Nothing to do with me.
I actually really loved how it ended with a bird flying away as well. I didn't know it was a wood pigeon. Actually, in my mind, I kind of imagined it as like a raven, but I could hear the wings, and I was like, oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, just like a nice little, a gentle flapping
exactly.
away. Yeah, nice.
Yeah. And had you made a diddly bow before?
Yeah, I had. So basically I thought, what is the simplest way I can create an instrument that, you know, that vibrates in the way that a sort of string would. And I had made a diddly bow before, but it was on a flat plank of wood, and it was a lot easier to do on a flat plank of wood.
I can imagine.
So I found there had been some wind damage to a yew tree that is sort of in the locale of where I live. And there had been this huge branch like by the side of the road for ages. And every time I walked past it, I was like, I need to take some of that wood to do something with it. And then when this piece arose, I was like, finally have an opportunity to use a piece of that wood. So I went and cut some off at the side of the road. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be fine. This would be absolutely fine for it. And then when it got round to it, because I hadn't practiced building it before. Like I went there knowing how to make one, but never tried it on that piece of wood. And yew wood is like super hard. So it's really difficult to nail stuff into. And it was at a sort of weird it was kind of bow shaped. So it was quite difficult I don't know if you know how they're made, but basically a string goes over like a circular jar or a tin. So when you're doing that in sort of like a bow shape, it's really weird.
I can imagine.
It's difficult to do.
I did look at a picture of when I read your piece just to see what it would look like, but I cannot imagine how it would have looked with the yew.
Yeah, it was very difficult. And I sort of like, I mean, it was just very difficult, and I couldn't like tighten the string as much as I'd like. So it kind of rattled a bit. So when it went into post, I was thinking, to force someone to listen to that racket for like half an hour or whatever would have been too much. So I had to sort of like reassess what I did with that section of the piece. Whereas I think like the building it aspect and the taking it apart aspect is, it is just someone sort of putting stuff together. But like the actual playing was a bit of a racket. So that's how it formed, really, like into three pieces, because I wanted to change how that sounded. But yeah, I mean, it's still the same part of time. Like it's just an extra like 10 minutes longer maybe because I slowed that section down.
I was like really struck by how clear it is just through sound when it's a human in the space. It was just so like the kind of repetitive motion. I don't know, there was something I was just like, wow, I can't see anything, but I know there's someone there, and that's just through knowing what human sounds are like. I thought that was really, I never thought about that before, And then I also became like acutely aware of my own presence then when I noticed that you were making sound, and then I was like, oh, what sounds am I making, and is it obvious that it's a human, and like what's the difference between me and like the blackbird or whatever. So yeah, that was like I was just really interesting to think of like a person with this purpose in this kind of space, and it made me think of the conversation that we had with Danny Treacy a few episodes ago about his work, and you talking about the condoms and stuff and people leaving like kind of little offerings and things. It just because his work was a lot about how these like forest spaces get used by people, and it's just really interesting.
I listened to that one, and you mentioned in it how when Ireland was being colonized, they cut down all of the woods, right? So they could see the peasants, not the peasants, you know how I mean, like the natives.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, those forests were mostly yew forests.
Were they?
In Ireland.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So they cut down all the yews in Ireland.
That's so sad.
And now there aren't really any.
Yeah, I know of one, but yeah, that's all.
Yeah, but that piece I really enjoyed listening to that one actually, like because that is how they are used in a lot of cases.
Right.
Like normally when I do field recordings, I'm not there.
Right.
But
really? Okay.
Yeah. I leave it overnight and it records at like midnight and that's it.
Right.
So it was strange being in the space as it was recording.
Right, I can imagine. I'm sure that's had you find some interesting sounds as well, leaving it overnight.
Yeah. Originally I did it as like can I get something like, really what I wanted was like fairies or something, or ghosts or fairies or something to
of course
rock up
on.
Or at least some like clandestine meeting of weirdos or something,
Yeah.
something strange. But actually, it never turns out to be quite that interesting. It's just owls or like rats and bugs and stuff, which is also kind of nice. But like, yeah.
It's funny, I think we stumble across these things when we're not looking for them most of the time. So this paragraph, I just thought in your writing it just captured something about how I imagined the experience would be being there, and so I will try my best to do it justice. Using the massive interior of this yew tree as a sort of megaphone held to the ground, the vibrations made by the rattling string were directed into the earth, bouncing between the net of roots and into the deep past, into history made organic, to when those folk inhabited the tree, to the early church, to the New Agers and heathens who leave cluties and crystals, to the lovers who fuck obscured by green-black foliage, into the bones of the buried and the underworld that opens into our own like a volcano from the gaping wound of the yew itself.
So that piece was written purely as like necessity. So I had no intention of writing something, but because of like the masses of context that is lost through just listening, like the audio piece is fine as a standalone thing, I think, but there is so much richness that is lost through not knowing sort of the context of the piece and what's happening and all the history and stuff. So really, I only wrote that as a way to sort of crystallize certain aspects of it. And I think originally it was, I don't know like what format I intended that writing to be. Like I didn't want to write too much because I could have gone on forever. But yeah, it was purely to begin with something that I just felt like I needed to do so that people could have some sort of understanding of everything that's, well, not even everything, just bits that are going on. Generally speaking, writing is something that I wish I did more of, but at the moment I generally only like write poetry every so often, and then like on the back of zines I'll do like a dinky little sort of paragraph to set the scene. But I did have plans to, what I want to do is like walk in Wales from like yew tree to yew tree as like sort of a pilgrimage and kind of write about that as I go, or not as I go, but write about it in some form. Wish I had videoed it, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, I think so, because like that, the instrument existed for like 15 minutes in time, and then I took it apart. So like you don't really have any concept of how ugly it was or how difficult it was to put together. Like you can hear me like knocking stuff over and like rattling around, and it's because I was trying to hammer nails into a piece of wood on like a tombstone. Like it probably would have taken a slightly more like Benny Hill kind of vibe if you had actually seen me do it.
Oh, and speaking of seeing things, actually, your drawing that you produced was this a piece that you had done previously, or was it something you did as you were producing
No,
the sound?
yeah, that was done in tandem with this. Like,
right.
It's sort of like a visual representation of like the structure in my mind. Like you've got the two kind of dualistic sun moon vibe going on, and the sort of like, I don't know, like vibrations into the underworld, and yeah, that was how I visualized it sort of like happening as I was doing it, I guess.
Yeah, there's so much movement in it. Like everything that you've described with vibration is like, and also the kind of like semicircular shape under the roots kind of reminds me of like ley lines or something, you know. Yeah, it just feels like a kind of like epicenter of energy.
Yeah, I feel like that is what those trees are like, though. They're just like these kind of super ancient beacons, like islands in an agricultural wasteland now.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing that old around. I mean, I'm fortunate because where I live is probably like one of the last sort of bastions of like these populations of trees. So they are less rare here, but they are also very sparse. And so there won't be anything as old as that tree around for like miles and miles. It'll just be this one old thing that exists from like a world that has long gone.
Oh yeah, actually I have a question about the sorry, I'm all over the place. About
right,
the I was wondering about the audio samples that you had used of the woman talking. There was one line about walking in a cemetery.
Yeah, Muriel Spark. That's who that is.
Muriel Spark. Right, of course.
Yeah. She's like, that actually, so everything that is in there, all the samples, because there is quite a lot of samples, like all of it is recorded on just like a bog standard, I can't even think of what make it is, but I got it for like 30 quid off eBay. It's just like a little recorder. So everything is like recorded through that, even if it's already on something. So like there's speaking samples in the central section as well that I've sort of like pitch shifted and like slowed down so they would kind of fit in with it. But all of them are like very sort of like generic sort of voice clips. They were just like sourced from YouTube, from various videos about yew trees. But I felt like it needed to have some sort of like human element to it other than myself like knocking around in it. And I feel like they sort of represent nicely the sort of community and human aspect around these trees.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the central bit is like, she was talking about like the mythology behind it and the sort of like associations with Hecate and all those bits. So that was quite nice.
Yeah.
But I did actually, a lot of the samples in it, I'll talk about the samples. A lot of the samples are just like random little bits that I put together and sort of like stitched together. So the drum beat is a beat I stole from the intro to like a musical track. And I just like tore it apart and stitched it together and changed it. And that became that. And then the drone that sort of like crescendos through the first piece, like the whole way through it, that's just a harmonica. Like that's just like I blew on a harmonica for a while. I recorded it, I stuck it in the thing, and I just changed it around. And then the central bit is the same, but I've just changed it around a bit. And also there's lots of like tapping on bits of wood and like bones. I mean, I think I wrote about it in the writing, but yeah, it's all just like some full like making noises.
Yeah.
And then just stitching together.
Yeah.
But it felt like it needed some like sort of texture outside of the like central piece of it. You know, the central audio. It is like I like it, but it felt like it needed sort of like more texture. And I guess in a way it's sort of like reminiscent of the tree itself. Like there is this central bowl which is enormous and, you know, awe-inspiring, but then there's so much else coming off it, and there's like a whole ecosystem that revolves around it.
I know you said you used a lot of samples, but I didn't feel like it was a lot when I was listening to it. Like it felt like it was just kind of peppered in a nice way, that there was voice and there was like, because I think sometimes we need voices to like stay focused or something. I don't know. But I don't know if that's just me, but
yeah, I was worried that because I mean it's quite a lengthy piece, and like you could probably fall asleep to it
in a nice way though.
Yeah, well, that's the reason part of the reason why I started doing field recordings is because like I want, like for my own use, I would like to fall asleep to like the sounds of the night in a random place, like at a tree.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of atmospheric, even if it's like predominantly white noise. At least like you're being cradled by this ancient organism as you fall to sleep, and that's kind of sweet in itself.
It is.
So that is part of it, I suppose. Like I didn't want it to be taxing to listen to. I know it is long, and that in itself could be taxing, but I just wanted it to feel kind of like you're being held, I guess.
Yeah.
Although it does have like darker aspects, and
yeah,
you know.
Yeah. But I definitely think it's very like, you know, you say you don't want it to be taxing, but it's definitely not. And, you know, sometimes like work that's like very ambient sounds can be a little bit inaccessible, but because there's something really open about it, and I think it's because you're there making sound, but also everyone is familiar with the sounds of like a woodland, and that doesn't feel taxing to listen to for most people, I would hope.
Yeah.
But, you know, so I think that it works really well, and I like that we get to hear the full kind of 40 minutes of, you know, making it, playing it, destroying it, or not destroying it, maybe that's too harsh a word, taking it apart again.
Well, it didn't take much destroying, let's put it that way.
And I think there's an element of, I mean, I know maybe you would have liked to have taken a video of it, but I do like that it exists in that place and time as a sound. Because I keep referring to this ever since Maya said it in her episode, but she said that sound allows for the most fictioning out of any artistic medium. And I like that it's got that sort of fictional quality to it. It'll always be a fiction to everyone else but you.
Yeah, only I've experienced what actually happened. Yeah, that's kind of nice. I guess when I'm in the company of these trees, I think of how they perceive time compared to us. And I think there's like, and I might be wrong in this, but I'm sure as in like some nature documentary at one point, like all creatures have like a similar amount of heartbeats in their life before they die. And your metabolism determines how quick that heartbeat is and how quickly you die. And the smaller you are, the quicker your heart goes, the faster you perceive time. So the bigger you are, you know, it works in reverse, right? So for something to be that huge and that old, like just how it perceives the universe, to have a person around it for like an instant in time, I don't know whether they notice us or whether they, or you know, whether they don't, because it's just like such a fraction of their lifetime. So, I mean, it's always beautiful being around, even if they don't know we're there, which I'm sure they probably do in some level. But
I'm sure, yeah. Yeah, I think you actually wrote about that too, didn't you? You said, a being that perceives in centuries rather than years, which I thought was a really nice way of
Yeah,
kind of.
I think they must. But I don't know. I think there's a dualism to that, because I expect that they do perceive or experience time on two like fronts, on like deep time and also momentary time, as we would. But yeah, I don't know. They open up such like a fascinating.
For sure. Yeah.
Who knows? Who could possibly know? Like, we don't know how dogs perceive the world. How can we know how
That's true.
an ancient like tree perceives it?
Yeah. But in that way, I guess I think sound art has been or field recording and editing and, you know, producing this work has been a really good way to express that sort of temporal element to this whole
And
fascination that you have.
I love that it's vibration as well.
Yeah, that's true.
About sound, like, and that's what can, like, even light is a sound, right? We're just like an acoustic hallucination in the universe. Like, everything is just vibration. So I'm gonna go a bit woo, but like, it's what connects everything. It's what creates everything. Like, so to capture something, I mean, I wish I could have done it in an analog form. That would be my one thing, because I don't like using digital, because I feel like, I mean, I'm a bit of a Luddite, so I would rather it be, you know, like in a physical format rather than binary. But, you know, that's what's most accessible. So that's what I use. Of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to have an artifact of it in, you know, a physical artifact.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're connected to it. Or I was connected to the tree for that moment, and now you're connected to it for listening. So that was nice. It's nice. It's like, it feels like a nice gift in a way.
It does.
And not that I'm saying that, you know, it's amazing, it's a gift to you, here you go. But like, I mean, I guess you get to experience it subjectively, just as I did, but in a slightly like skewered way.
You can find more from A Ton of Worms on Instagram at A Ton of Worms. Accompanying images for this episode are at our website. And there are links to all of this in the episode description, as always. Listeners on Spotify are able to experience an accompanying video for this episode by artist Sapphire Goss. And for listeners on other platforms, you can find Sapphire's work on our website. All of this will be included in the episode description. Sapphire Goss is a multimedia artist who uses obsolete technologies to explore experimental materiality and hybrid collaborative forms to make work that grows, decays, and lives beyond the screen. She creates chimerical imagery using unexpected materials, looping and processing to make an analog uncanny, resulting in grainy, shimmering, otherworldly bursts of light and emotion, both moving and mysterious. A wonderful accompaniment to this audio work. This episode has been edited by Astrid Björklund, the other half of Subterra. Thank you for listening to the Fermynwoods Contemporary Art Podcast. If you enjoy our podcast, make sure to positively rate, review, and subscribe on your podcatcher. It helps other people find the podcast, and it makes us feel good about ourselves. This podcast series is part of Xylophobia, Fermynwoods Contemporary Art's new 2-year program funded by Arts Council England. Visit fermynwoods.org for more information on our program and to sign up to our monthly email newsletter. Follow us at Fermynwoods on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And make sure to check out Subterra at sub.terrestrials on Instagram. Thanks for listening. Hope to see you back here soon.